It is about time. My top 10 fantasy and sci-fi books of all time. Is it warm in here? Are you warm? Or am I just nervous about this list? How can I narrow down my favorite books to 10? There's so many out there. Oh my god. Why am I doing this? Hey everyone, Fina here from Fina Reads. It is about time. In this video, I will finally talk about my top 10 fantasy and sci-fi books of all times. Not just this year, no, of all times. Without further ado, let's jump into my top 10, starting with number 10, which is Project Hail Mary, the only book on the list where I don't have an actual physical copy for. And Project Hail Mary is probably one of the most popular books on my list, so buckle up. Project Hail Mary is one of those books where you actually don't want to know a whole lot going in, but just to summarize in one sentence, it's an entertaining, fast-paced sci-fi in which Ryland wakes up on a spaceship, has no clue what's going on. I mean, the whole world depends on him, but he doesn't know what, why, where, when. Great setup. This is a book that I read shortly after it came out, and I reread it very shortly after my first read as an audiobook. And this is also one of those books that is so much better as an audiobook just because of what is happening in the story. That audio experience adds so much value to it. The reason why I have this on this list is because it keeps popping up in my mind. I keep thinking about what happened. I keep thinking about how amazingly well written it was, how the story was told with the amnesia of the main character and how slowly everything was revealed. It made it so much more entertaining and it fit the story really, really well. Spot number 9 belongs to H.G. Perry's Shadows trilogy, with book 1 being A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians. No, I cannot remember that title. This was a cover buy for me. I saw this cover at one point. I thought this is really, really cool, and I'm so glad that I did. So this duology is a retelling in the first book of the French Revolution, in the second book of Napoleonic Wars, with a little bit of magic sprinkled in. So it's kind of like a historical urban fantasy, but urban as in our world, not urban as in smut or any kind of stuff. You're following actual historical characters, so if you look up on Wikipedia or wherever, you will find these characters that I mentioned here were real characters, obviously without the magical abilities. But you're visiting sites from 1700 something rather, and you're experiencing that time period through those books. With a huge difference that your main characters are something akin to vampires and some other stuff, and that there are big monsters swimming in the oceans and that kind of stuff. You know, other than that, very realistic. It's full of political intrigue, full of scheming, full of great dialogues. The reason why I love this duology is because the historical accuracy and how the magic was woven into that. So one of the examples is, you know, back then the revolution was about freeing the people, and in this case it's about freeing the magician. She tweaked the actual historical happenings in a very interesting way. Plus, it is a really cool slow burn book, like really slow burn. You are getting to observe all these great conversations in Parliament and between the different characters. If you are a history nerd and if you want to read something with that happened in the real world, but what it would look like with magic sprinkled in, this is the duology for you. Spot number 8 is for The Chronicles of the Wolf Queen, or as it was called before that, The Chronicles of the Bitch Queen. There goes my monetization. This was originally an indie pop series that was then later picked up by Orbit, and it is one of those series that I will not recommend for everyone. I loved it. I will rave about it, but I'm fully aware that the majority of people probably will not vibe with this series. This is an Asian-inspired fantasy series. The main character, Queen Talian, is about to marry the son of the rival clan to finally unite the fractions and bring peace to the land. Problem is, the husband disappears before the marriage, and instead of marrying him, she receives kind of a weird note saying, "Hey, I'm on this other continent over there. Can you come over here? Can we meet and talk?" Just like, well, what am I supposed to do here? And the book is written from Queen Talian's perspective, so you are sinking really deep into her head and learning what is even going on throughout the 3 books. You're learning why the husband left, what is happening in her country, about all the issues that the country is having, the political intrigue, what role her father played, and all those kind of things. And it is because of that, very character driven and has a lot of introspective moments where she is just sitting there and thinking about, what did I do wrong? Could I have done something differently? They're like views back on her relationship with her father growing up. I love this kind of stuff, but I can also completely see how this can turn people off, because she has moments where she's really depressed about everything that is happening. And no wonder. I mean, a lot of shit happened to her in her life, and that situation really is messed up. Spot number 7 is for a 7-book series, which is Harry Potter. No one knows who Harry Potter is, right? No one has any idea. Harry Potter is definitely a nostalgia value for me. I've watched the movies a lot of times. I read the books a lot of times. Well, at least the early books. I don't think I've ever reread book 5, 6, and 7, but the first books, I've read them a couple of times. And I think that happened to a lot of you. You just grew up with those books, so they have a special place in your heart. You just enjoy the story. And if you think about it, the world that was created and the impact it had on so many of us is just incredible. Which book does that? Which book had this impact to our world that we now have theme parks for it, that you can, and I've done that a couple of times, that you can go to Universal Studio and have breakfast at the Three Broomsticks? Which book series lets you do this? Completely subjective, nostalgia, the impact it had on the world. That's why I had to put it on the list. Objectively speaking, of course there are issues in the series. Of course it's not perfect. And of course there are plot holes and, you know, the characters are dumb at times. But it still is a series that left a mark on our world. Book number 6 might be a controversial pick because I'm putting in Roadside Picnic, which I just recently read. Recency bias? Maybe. This book is about Red, who is a stalker in this fictional dystopian world. What that means is he is accessing the zone, which is an area where aliens landed and then disappeared and left the zone in a state that you actually can't really go in it, or it's not really safe to go in it. Stalkers do it anyway for the money because they're bringing out like alien artifacts and then selling them on the black market. And this book is an idea-based classic sci-fi where it's really just about following Red along as he is doing whatever he's doing as a stalker. And barely anything is explained, but it is so impactful, especially that last part. I thought it was so impactful. I loved how it turned around and turned from a story of we are just following this random guy to like a whole bigger meaning. And I also loved that even if you are not someone who loves to read like philosophical books or whatever, you can still read the book just for the story and enjoy it for that. I love the relationships. I love the theme. I love the aspects that it was covering, like great capitalism and whatnot, in subtle yet not so subtle ways. And I just loved the vibe the book was giving me. Like when they were in the zone and when we were following Red, that vibe that I was feeling while I was reading it, it was a once in a lifetime type of situation for me. We're getting into the top 5. Oh my goodness. And trust me, I mean, even till here, I've resorted a couple of books and thrown some out and put some others back in. Anyway, spot number 5 belongs to the Rainfall series by Benjamin Averin, with the first book being Salt in the Wound. This is a finished trilogy, and I loved it because it used known tropes and packaged them in a new way. In particular, this is using the Arthurian saga, but we are actually set in a dystopian future. The rain destroyed the world, and because of that, we are now in the future, but actually kind of in a medieval setting. You don't get too much of that throughout the world, but there are aspects where you have futuristic elements in the story, but your general world is like, you know, castles and no electricity and people are wearing rough cloth and whatnot. It's a really, really cool mix of the two. Plus, it comes with a lot of unique items. Like the magic system is really interesting here. The bestiary is really cool. Like we have rain rights, for example. In what fantasy book do you find rain rights, right? Usually it's unicorns and dragons, which, don't get me wrong, I love it. A lot of good character development, a lot of good found family and relationship, a lot of flawed characters, which I really appreciate, especially when it comes to female characters. And throughout the series, such an engaging read generally. It's an easy series that you can binge. It's an easy read. yet it keeps you glued to the pages till the very end. And it's so much fun to follow our main characters through the different journeys that they are doing. Oh my goodness, we are moving up. Spot number 4 is for the Risen Kingdom series by Curtis Craddock, with book 1 being An Alchemy of Mask and Mirrors. I'm sorry, I'm not farting, I'm squeaking on my book. I apologize. This was such a surprise. I had no idea what I was getting into. It was one of those really random finds, and then bought the entire series and binged the entire thing. We had a little buddy read going on for that one. We were all sitting there and it's like, why is no one talking about this series? This is phenomenal. So first of all, we are following Isabel, who doesn't have any magical abilities in a world where magical abilities are incredibly important. She is part of royalty, and she's about to be married off to a kind of weird guy. She gets weird wives from him. 2 of his past wives just disappeared, and no one really knows what's going on. So she and her bodyguard, essentially, which is Musketeer Jean-Claude, are going off to meet this guy, and the story ensues. The relationship between the two, which is kind of like a father-daughter relationship, even though he is not the father, is incredible. I don't think there is another fantasy book out there that has written such an incredible father-daughter relationship. Just the care Jean-Claude has for Isabel, the worries he has, how he takes care of her, how he worries about her. It is so wholesome and heartwarming to see that. And the other way around too, how Isabel loves him as her protector, but also like a father figure, and how she looks up to him and looks at him for advice and all of those kind of things. It has steampunk elements in it. There are floating islands that you can get to via airships and whatnot. The magic system is so vivid, full of shapeshifters and blood shadows and mirror walkers. Setting reminiscent of France. Think musketeers, swashbuckling, and you have all of that in there too. You have fantastic found family, especially in the later books. And the writing is so good in the series. By the way, it is way too long since I've read this book. I urgently want to reread it. So if you were interested in reading that, let me know, because I'm looking for a buddy read partner for this one. It's maddening. The moment I finished it, I went out there and I was looking for something similar, ideally from the author in the same world. I need something. If you know Curtis Craddock, or for whatever reason he is listening to this, I need more in this world. It's so good. Top 3, my friends. Funny enough, my top 3 were actually pretty straightforward for me, because they have been my favorite for a long, long time. And if you've been around on the channel, I'm pretty sure you can figure out what my top 3 fantasy and sci-fi series are. Starting with my top 3, which is the Foundation trilogy. I invested in the Folio Society Special Edition. That's how much I love this series. Again, this is more an idea-based sci-fi, where the character Selden predicts an apocalypse, but it doesn't happen in 10 or 100 years. It happens 1,000 years from now. So he puts a plot into place that will protect the bigger world, the universe, from this catastrophe. And no one really knows what he actually did, or if this is even real, to a point where throughout that trilogy, where you're following multiple centuries of that story, where it becomes kind of like a cult-like situation. And not just that, but that journey is a really interesting part in the book, because you're starting obviously with Selden, and as he, realizes what is happening, but then you're jumping thousands of years into the future, and you see what is happening at specific important dates that have to do with his prediction at that time in the future. Can be super confusing, because you have to figure out, like, wait a second, those are all of a sudden new characters, all of a sudden we're in a different timeline. He doesn't call it out straightforward, so it's a little bit of a, you have to figure it out as you're reading it. It was one of my earlier sci-fis that I read. It's still one of the ones that is so ingrained in me, that I still think highly of, that I still love, that I still think about. It's like how much I enjoyed my read through of this one. So yeah, I can't wait to then finally at one point read the bigger series. Forget Game of Thrones, forget Malazan. My book 2 is so much better than these series, well, in my opinion at least, and that's the Gunmetal God Saga by Samuel Akhter. Currently sits at 4 books. It's not quite finished yet, but if I remember correctly, don't quote me on that, I think it's supposed to end with 5 books. We will see. At one point it was supposed to end with 4, yet here we are, still not finished. Again, one of those fantasy series that has a lot of unique elements, where the writing is just fantastic, where the character development is just fantastic. I'm sorry, I'm a character-driven reader, so that's just what I love. But Gunmetal Gods is a Middle Eastern-inspired fantasy series, very reminiscent of Game of Thrones when it comes to a lot of different fractions that fight for world domination. This is more based on religions, though, so your belief system is a very important part throughout the story. On top of all of that, it comes with cosmic horror elements. Think Eldritch Gods. I mean, look at the cover. It tells you pretty much everything already. And one of my favorite parts in this series really is the character development. Each and every one of them is so detailed. You're simply digging into their brains and getting to know them intimately so you can understand where they are coming from. And one of the things that I find very fascinating with those characters, it showcases this. Everybody has their own belief system across the world, and everybody thinks their belief system is right. And how are these characters interacting, or these fractions really interacting with each other because of that? What issues it causes, how it changes how we perceive people. This is one of those series where I'm crazy curious where he goes with it at the end, because with every book, we are getting a bigger and bigger picture of the world, including the meddling gods and all of these things. And we're at a point with book 4 where, I'm just like mouth wide open, eyes wide open. I'm like, boy, what is happening here? It's simply that good. My last book, my top fantasy and sci-fi book, my favorite of all times, the best fantasy in my opinion that is out there, it is the Green Rider series. Of course it is. Come on, you know me by now. If you don't know me, now you know me. Similar nostalgic factor than Harry Potter. Not as grand in that sense, but this series has accompanied me for many, many years. I found it in my maybe early 20s in German back then, and I've been reading it many, many times. Next reread is probably planned for next year when book 8 is coming out, which also means it's unfortunately an unfinished series. There are 7 books and 2 novellas out so far. But what is it even about? This book starts out with Kerrigan, the character that we have on our cover here, who is fleeing from her school. She is 16 at that time. She hates it there. It's all those rich, spoiled guys, and she is not one of them. She runs away and wants to travel to her father and just be done with it. And on her way, a rider is racing towards her, and she realizes there are 2 arrows sticking out of his back, and the moment he reaches her, he's basically falling off the horse, collapsing, about to die. But before he dies, he makes her promise to take the message that he has to the king and to really do it fast, without any stops, without any pauses, and just get this message to the king. So she grabs his coat, she grabs the horse, jumps onto the horse, and off she goes. And of course, there are a lot of dangers waiting for her on the journey. Very typical Western-style fantasy in a medieval style. It starts out a bit younger. Yes, it's cheesy at times, but what I love about this series, especially as the character grows and becomes older, it becomes darker, it becomes a lot more mature, and it's a female character with flaws. And not simple flaws, not she is gorgeous but thinks she is not. No, there's a lot of stuff going on with Kerrigan. The author took a lot of time to really make her a standout personality and not someone where you're like, you are good at everything. I mean, technically she is. It's kind of a joke in this series, but you get my point. And yeah, it's just a great ride. What you think? Does this work? Do I need to resort things again? Should I put some books lower, higher up? What you think? Let me know that in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the books that you've seen and you are not subscribed to my channel yet, please do so. I would really love to have you here and talk with you in my comments and just hear your opinions on the books that I enjoy or sometimes even not enjoy. So I hope to see you soon on my channel. Until then, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day and I see you soon with my next video. Bye!